Hello and welcome to another video. Now I'm making this video for two reasons, and the first reason is that it's not been clear skies for ages, so I've not shot a video in absolutely ages. This feels a bit weird now, to be fair. And the second reason is on all of my previous editing videos I've had quite a few comments saying that I work through too fast. So the point of this video is going to be an editing tutorial as such. Show you how I edit anyway my Astro images in Lightroom, and I'm going to take some time to go through it this time. But what I'm also going to do, and I'm just going to start the screen recording, is I am going to make a LUT out of my preset, and then I will export that somehow, and I'll link it down below in this so you can have a free LUT. So what I would say in terms of using LUTs is that it's a great idea for a beginner in terms of one-click solution, but you're never going to get to a one-click solution where you can just click and your image looks fantastic. It's not going to work like that. So even with using LUTs, you're still going to have to edit the picture to make it look good. So you might as well just learn the settings yourselves, what they mean, and make your own LUTs. But that being said, I'm still going to I'll export the LUT, the one that I use for most of my astrophotography, and yeah, and I'll share that. So let's jump in the computer and I will show you how I edit, and I will try and take my time about it. So, okay, so this is looking like it, right? So there's me down there in part of the foreground, showing the torch up at the dam. There's a little bit of Milky Way there as well. So what I'll do, I will reset this image. That's how it looked when it came out of camera. And I'll also show you what my preset would do to it. So make that full screen. How do you make that full screen? Oh, I suppose there's a before and after with my LUT. I don't know what I'm doing, so yeah, so we'll get there. But basically that you can see there the before and the after of the LUT straight out of camera, and then what my LUT has done to it there. So again, I'm going to link that down below, but you can see here straight away that the profile corrections that I set for my LUT is for the Samyang 14mm, because I always used to shoot on that, whereas I've now got the Samyang 20mm, which is sat over there. And so this already wouldn't be relevant for the Samyang 20mm, so with a different lens it wouldn't be relevant for you anyway. So straight away you're going to have to do some editing even with the LUT. So yeah, so I'll change that. That seems to be the closest. For some reason there's not a profile for a 20mm Samyang. Right, anyway, back to the start, back to the reset. And actually the very first thing that I would do is change the white balance and then go and set your profile corrections. So we'll start with the white balance, and you'll set it however you set it in camera. As long as you shoot in RAW, then it doesn't matter what white balance you use when you're out and shooting, but at the same time it's probably easier to get it right in camera rather than having to mess around with them. But again, that being said, all I do is just leave it in auto. And the reason why I leave my camera in auto white balance, and I have got a video on that one as well, of the profiles, that are color profiles that I use, and I leave it in that auto white balance because I shoot video and photo. Whereas if I was just shooting photo all night, I'd just choose one white balance, I'd leave it all night, but I let the camera decide because I like to shoot video in between my photos so I can make the YouTube videos. Anyway, I'm fucking waffling already. Right, so first thing I always do is just change it to auto. And if you're happy with that, then that's fine. But if you're not happy with that, then this is the slider that you use to change it. And so basically, the lower down the number, the cooler or the bluer the image will be, and the higher up the number, the warmer the image will be. So it's all of this is personal preference, but actually pretty much 9 times out of 10, I'm all right with how Lightroom chooses on auto. Then the next one down is the tint, which actually we may get into a little bit later, that you can put more sort of, I think it's magenta or cyans or whatever it is into the image. And a little bit of purple actually looks pretty good sometimes in Milky Way. But as with most of these things, if you're editing it and you're using the sliders too much, then the image becomes obvious that it's been edited, and at that point it's not good anymore. It needs to be as natural looking as you can possibly get. Right, so that was a quick tip, by the way. If you do slide the slider all the way up to the top, if you just double click on the name of the slider, it will take it back to 0 or back into the middle where it originally was. So exposure is probably a pretty straightforward one in terms of it's just going to make the image brighter, make the image darker. Personally, I never really touch the exposure. I get as close to where I want it to be in camera, and then I generally don't need to touch the exposure slider. Every now and then I will if I haven't got it right, but generally I will work through with the rest of these instead of just hitting the exposure slider. So hopefully that makes sense. Now the contrast one is going to add, as it says, more contrast into the image. So you can see what it's doing there, lightening, darkening, making it a bit sharper, things like that. I generally don't touch that as well. We might do, if I get into editing the Milky Way, I would put some contrast into the Milky Way generally, but let's just start with how I do it. So generally the first thing I always do is pull up the shadows, and you can see that's brought up quite a lot of the dark part of the image already. What I generally always do as well with my highlights is drop them down, and you can see what the highlights are doing with that light pollution there. It also brings a bit more contrast itself into the sky. But what I also do when I drop the highlights, I tend to compensate by putting the white slider up as well. So you can see again, the whites are just affecting the white parts of the image. So while I pull the highlights down, because it generally gives you more detail of, say, the Milky Way or less light pollution or more contrast in the sky, I will also pop the whites up so that the stars start to show out more as well. Again, you'll find your own way of editing once you're understanding using all the sliders. Now the blacks, I generally don't touch the blacks. Again, it's the same as the whites. It's only affecting that part of the image. Now, if you had a really underexposed image, then you could bump up the blacks the same way that you do with the shadows. But I tend to use the S-curve, and I put in I raise the whites in that area. Sorry, I raise the blacks in that area, and I'll show you for that. So far, I've hardly really touched anything. I've hit the temperature to change the white balance. I've pulled the highlights down to bring some more detail into the sky. I've counteracted that with some whites that will bring back some of that lost detail in the stars, and I've not touched the blacks. I'm going to put the blacks down to where they were. Now clarity, I just, as a rule, generally, I will just always bump this up to a full stop, so that's plus 24, plus 25, something like that. But yeah, what the clarity does, it is a really interesting slider. It will add sharpness into your slider, and it will also add light into those areas, but at the same time, it will make the image look over sharpened and also bring a lot of noise into the image. So you need to be sparing with the clarity. But again, if we get into some gradual filters and stuff later, I use a lot of clarity in the sky, for example. Right, so next one then, the dehaze is very much like the contrast. I don't actually know the difference between them, someone else probably does. But what I always do is, if you pull out the dehaze, well, the image goes blurry there, and if you put too much in, how it just goes super contrasty. So I always put some dehaze in my shots, but again, same with the clarity, never go too far with it. So sometimes here, what I'll do is the vibrance and the saturation here will affect the entire image. So if I put some vibrance in, right to the top, you can see what it's doing there. Take that back, put saturation in, right to the top, you can see what it's doing there. Now, I don't really understand the difference between the vibrance and the saturation, but you can see that what they're doing is two different things. They're adding color into different places. Now, I'm not really sure what it is. So yes, from here you could do a global whole of the photo. I just want to increase the vibrance, want to increase the saturation. You can do that from here. But again, I generally tend not to. I sometimes put like one stop up of the vibrance, but I generally do that down in the HSL sliders, which are down below, and we'll get to that in a second. So next one then is the tone curve, and this is where I was talking about adding, raising the blacks in the image. So what I always do is just raise it a very small amount, and you can see what that's doing there. It's the same as pushing the whites up in the image, but it's only affecting the dark parts of the image. So generally what I do is I just raise the blacks a very, very little bit. Again, unless you're looking for that sort of like faded look, then you don't want to go over the top with this. And what I also do to add a bit more contrast back in after I've lifted is I just pull it out slightly, very slightly. So next thing that I do is hit here, which is the midtones. Actually, I should probably explain that. Yeah, so this is the dark parts of the image. This is the histogram behind it saying that the majority of that image is dark. These are the midtones of the image, and these are the highlights of the image. And again, generally, I don't mess with this too much. You can play around with it as much as you like, but what I always generally tend to do is raise those blacks a little and pull it out a little, as I just did then. I then drop an anchor in the middle to hold it, and then I will just push up the highlights here. And if you can see what that's doing to the image there, that's just sticking a little bit more contrast into the sky. And so that generally makes the stars pop a bit and makes the Milky Way pop a bit. And that's all I do for that. So, yeah, shit. I should have done white balance and then gone to the profile corrections. That's generally how I would do it, but I'm just working my way down now. So let's go to those profile corrections. I always click remove chromatic aberration, and I always click enable profile corrections, assuming that Lightroom actually has a profile correction for your lens. Like I say, it doesn't for the 20mm Samyang, but it does for the 14mm. If you've got a lens that isn't manual, if you've got an auto lens or a lens that feeds information to the camera, then just by clicking enable profile corrections, then it will pick up what lens you are using and it will enable the correct profile for you. If you've got one of the Samyang lenses and it's one of these manual ones like I have, there isn't one. So you have to go through and find. And so on here, there is the Samyang. And there's my 14mm that I would generally use. But actually, because there isn't one for the 20mm, the closest that I've found to what it would be if you just did it manually is this one down here, this 24mm 2.8. So I give that a click, and you can see what that has done to the image. It's taken off some vignetting, and it's also slightly warped the edges to make it to make the image flatter and to get rid of some of that vignetting that the lens causes. So that's it, creating the corrections in Lightroom. So hopefully that made sense. You can push that a bit further if you wanted to, like you can see the distortion here, how it's pulling the image forwards and backwards. And also you could get rid of some more vignetting or add some more vignetting, etc, etc. But yeah, generally I'm quite happy with that. I think what I'll do is not have the profile correction enabled for this LUT that I'm going to export, just so that you click on that yourself so that you don't just get my Samyang 14mm. Right, so I'm hoping this isn't too fast, by the way, it probably is. We are now at the HSL, which is the hue, saturation and luminance sliders. Now, the hue will change the colour of a colour in the image, and it will change it over to another colour. So for example, this is the green slider or this is the blue slider, and what that will do is that will change the colour of those blue colours in the image over to a different colour of that slider. Now generally there's not a whole lot of reason, unless you wanted to get, you know, a little bit creative, there's not a whole lot of reason to be messing with the hue. You do sometimes get funny colours from your camera, say being in auto at night. It might make the greens too green for you, and you might want to make them a little bit yellow, for example, or you know, make them a little bit darker, something like that. But generally, it's not something that I would touch. If I wanted to make the greens not stand out as much, I would just reduce the saturation, which is what I'm going to do here. Now, so the next sliders are all about the different colors in the image, and if you want to increase the individual saturation to them. So not increasing the saturation across the whole image like we were looking at with the sliders before. I'm just in this instance going to pick my oranges, my yellows and what have you. Now, how I used to do this was that I wanted to try and get rid of the light pollution as much as I possibly could, as if it wasn't there, so sort of turn it white. But what I've started to do is actually just embrace that light pollution and have it as part of the image. So for example, with this one, this light over here, I know it's going to be orange, and I'm just going to have a look by playing with the saturation on that area of the image. And what you can see there is, as I pushed it too far, you can see the image, the colour starting to fall apart. And again, that's definitely not something you want to do. You don't want it to look like it's been over edited. So yeah, so I might just put a little bit of saturation there in the yellows and the oranges. And again, as I was saying with the greens, it looks quite, it's quite dark green there. So I might just pull a little bit of the saturation out of that. Also, you can see here with the light, if I adjust the yellows, that's adjusting the head torch light. And again, I like there being a little bit more colour in there, but I don't want to go over the top with it. Okay, so with that one, again, personal preference you can play with. I sometimes find by adding too much contrast, or what are we calling it, the dehazing, will add a bit too much colour into the sky, make it too blue, which makes it look unnatural. So sometimes I will then pull just a little bit, again minus like 25, a little bit out of the sky to make that a little bit more natural of how it actually looked when I was there. Right, last one then is the luminance, and that will affect the same colours again, but it will just affect their brightness. Now generally what I will always do is I'll bump the luminance up on the blues, because that tends to make the stars stand out more. But again, as you can see in this image, it's starting to make it fall apart at the top there, like you can't really see the Milky Way anymore. So I'm just going to pop a little bit of luminance into the blues. I'm not really going to touch anything else. Like there you can see, if you drop the luminance down, that adds more contrast into those yellows, for example. But again, it's making the image fall apart up here. So yeah, again, not going to push anything too much. But if I drop the orange, drop the yellows just a little bit, it will help a little bit with our light pollution over there. Right, sharpening. Now what I tend to do, and what this is doing is very similar to the clarity, this is adding sharpness to the image. Now what that will do is, if we zoom in here and we crank this up, you can see it brings out a lot more detail in the image compared to where it was. But what you can also see is, if I pull that sharpening too far, you can see all the grain coming out from the noise in the image. So again, you don't want to push the sharpening too far. Now what I always do is I bump the sharpening right to the top, and then I grab the masking, and if you press the Alt key, as you start to drag the masking along, it will show you what areas of the image it's going to add the sharpening to. And as you pull this masking further and further along, it adds the sharpening to less and less of the image, until I get right to the top there, and virtually all we're adding to that sharpening to is the stars and just some of the outline of the image. And I like that, so that's how I do that. Next one down then is your noise reduction. And yeah, as we were looking at a bit of noise before, let's find a bit that's a bit noisy. Okay, so the sky here is a bit noisy. If we grab the noise reduction here, then you'll see what that will do to that image. So it's taken away all of the noise in the image, but made it look really odd, because the grain from the noise in the image from your higher ISO or from the longer shutter speeds is also taking away where the stars are as well. So there's a really fine balance, and I personally don't touch the noise reduction. I try to get it right in camera and not have to add any noise reduction to it, but every now and then you need to. A little bit extra on these ones is you can then fine tune that in further, so you can add noise reduction to the colours. You can bump up the noise reduction but then pull back some of the detail. Again, play with it, it's personal preference. Okay, these are the lens corrections, which we've talked about. And then next one down here is your transforms. So basically, if you got the horizon off a bit, oh, that's the wrong one. Say if you got the horizon off a bit and the image wasn't straight, then you could play with the rotation of the image to get it to where you're happy. Now, if you get these white bars across, then you just need to click the Constrain Crop, and it will adjust the image. It will crop it in to get rid of that. But again, yeah, generally when I shoot, I make sure that the spirit level in the camera says that it's flat, says it's balanced. So unless the horizon is massively wonky, then I generally I don't really touch this. We're getting close, you know, so vignetting, I always like to just add a little bit of vignetting to an image. Now you can either do that down here, and you can see what that's doing. That's just darkening the outsides of the image and therefore throwing focus into the center of the image. Or you could go the other way with it, which you wouldn't do, but yeah, you could say if your lens gave a lot of vignetting, you could pull some of that away, add a little bit more light, a little bit more white into the image. I always add a little bit of vignetting, just a tiny bit. But you can do this with a radial filter, which I actually will probably show you now. Yeah, just show you that you can change the midpoints of where that vignette is, so you can add more or less vignette, if that makes sense. I definitely want a bit of vignetting in this image, because the whole point of this image is there's Dickhead down there in the middle, and I want me to be the foreground in this image. So you want to draw the eye to obviously the Milky Way, but then obviously what's going on down here. So by darkening down the edges of this image, it just sort of draws the eye to the middle. And then yeah, feathering and things like that. There you can see that there's no feathering there, so it's just a really harsh vignette, and that's with the feathering on. Personally, I don't play with calibration. Again, with the night shots, is generally don't really need to, but this is just a more extreme example, I would say, of the HSL sliders, where you can change the colors of certain things to look like other things. Not something I use. You can definitely have a play around with that. So that's all of the basic sliders. What I'll show you through now then is just how to use these at the top. Now, the first one here is if you want to crop the image, and obviously an Instagram is a 4:5 like that. So what I tend to do is I'll either do this on my phone in the Lightroom app on my phone, or I'll edit an image where I'm happy with it, I'll export that image, and then I'll come here, crop it for the Instagram, and then I'll export that image, and then I'll have them both at the same time, and I'll upload them both to Instagram. I'm going to put that back to how it was for this. So the next one along then is spot removal tool. Now generally you won't need to use this, and also generally it does a good job, it doesn't do a great job. So if you had, I'm trying to find one now, if you had a hot pixel, and you might be able to see one there, there's a little bit of speck of blue there. If you have a hot pixel in the image, then you can remove it very easily with this, and I use the keyboard shortcuts, or you can just use the size slider, and it's the bracket keys that I use to make this smaller or larger. And you literally would just click, and all it will do is take the pixels from the image nearby, and it will overwrite those, so it will get rid of that pixel. And you can choose where you want it to be, and if you do certain places, it will make it look really odd. So it'll replace it with a bit of the bridge here, which you don't want, with the dam, sorry. But yeah, generally it does a really good job at doing that. But say I wanted to remove all of that, then you're probably more likely going to need to put it into Photoshop, because it's a little bit better at doing that. But also, you never know, let's have a try. You just click and slide across if you want to select a larger amount, and there you go, it's chosen that. Let's have a look, back out on the image. To be fair, that's done a pretty good job. That's done a pretty good job. Let's try it again with this thing down here, because I think this thing looks quite distracting, the waste pipe, whatever it is. I'm going to grab that. And it's not done as great a job there, because it's just overlaid it with the grass. But if I were to drag it up to here, change it so that it's overriding it with brick, not too bad, like it's in the distance, so it's not too bad. But yeah, generally if you wanted to do a quite large area, you would probably need to put it into Photoshop. But that being said, that's done a pretty good job, to be fair. Just trying to see if I can find any more hot pixels. I've got such a dirty screen on this that I can't fucking see. I was shooting on the 20mm with a reasonably short shutter speed, so that's probably why there's not really that many hot pixels. But let's have a look. This little bit here, which you could either just crop out, or I'll just give it a click. Seems alright for me. So I think I've labelled that one enough. The next one is a red eye correction. Not going to be using that in an Astro image. The next one is the graduated filter, which I do use quite a lot. And what I will do with graduated filter is you select it, and then you drag on the image where you want that filter to affect the image, and if you just let the mouse hover over, it will show you what part of the image it is going to be affecting. So if I drag that down a little bit more, there, so it's going to be affecting the sky now, and you can see that it's feathering, which is what this is here. If you grab this, you can feather more or less into the image. And so what I'm doing now is I'm only going to be affecting the sky. So if I bump the clarity up there, right to the top, you can see that it's put a lot more grain into the image, but it's also brought the Milky Way out quite a lot. I'm going to stick a little bit more dehaze in, that's far too much. And then we can also play with these highlights here of the image. And again, if I'm pulling down the highlights, I like to readjust using the whites. I don't want to lose too much of that Milky Way. So that's one graduated filter that I've done for the sky. Let's have a look at another graduated filter just for this area down here, and it will keep the same settings, or we can click new before putting the graduated filter on, and then drag up, and then it won't affect those settings. I get what I'm trying to say. Yeah, so I could bump the clarity up really high here and add a bit more interest into the foreground, but that's not what I'm trying to do. Again, I'm trying to add it only to me, not to this more distracting part of the image. So I'm going to delete that one. That's how those filters work. The next one then is the radial filter, and this is one that I use quite a lot. And so this is a circle that you will drag over a certain area, and then you will only be affecting inside of that circle, or outside if you choose to invert it. But yeah, so that's what I'm going to use. You could use it for a vignette, so you could select the whole of the image, and then as you pull the shadows up in the middle, it will leave the outside edges darker, or vice versa. If you inverted it and pulled the shadows down, then you'd be adding a vignette just to the corners. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to add one, and just over me, I'm going to pull the shadows on it, I'm going to pull the highlights in that area, and I'm going to pull the clarity again, just so it makes me stand out a little bit. I've just put a tiny bit of dehaze, and I can't really see what it's affected there because the dot's on it, so I'm just going to hit enter to make it go away, and then have a look in and see if I'm happy with it. And I think I'm pretty happy with that, that's fine. What I also do is the same thing with the light pollution. Now, and I was showing with the sliders before how you can adjust just the saturation in one area of the image. Like this would be some yellows and some oranges. What you could also do is stick the radial filter on, and then go at it with the white balance, with the temperature, and that's what I generally tend to do. So I will absolutely punch the white balance on that, and you can see that that's made that light pollution really pop out. Now sometimes it goes a little bit too far, so you can just pull the saturation down maybe a little bit on that. But it makes, rather than trying to hide the light pollution, it sort of makes it more of a feature in the image, if that makes sense. And then yeah, we could use the same thing if we wanted to just put a little bit more clarity, say on the Milky Way. Have a look at that. So if I stick even more clarity into there, does it make it pop out? Meh, a bit, not too much. If I add some more contrast into it, does it make it pop out? Again, a bit, add a little bit more contrast into there, nothing too major. Highlights, no, I don't think I want to mess with that. And then there's the whites there. That has brought out a little bit more actually, so I think I will leave that. I also think that the sky is a bit too bright. So I'm going to pull the highlights down a little bit more on it. Just keeping an eye, making sure that it's not falling apart anywhere in the image. And I've basically got through all of it for you. You could adjust any part of the image if you wanted to, any part that you want to draw the eye to, or any part that you want to take out. There's also this adjustment brush right at the end, and I might as well show you that. So what you can do is, again, it will only affect the areas that you paint this brush onto. So say I wanted to just only affect the Milky Way a little bit, you just paint that area, and again, if you hold over it, it will show you what it's actually going to be adjusting there. You can see that's not really worked a whole lot out of that. Right, Okay, yeah, so see, I painted over Milky Way there. So you would just be making fine adjustments to it. Now, you can go even further with these effects by going into custom and changing here. But again, I don't think that's necessarily for this video. I'm just going to try and show you the basics. And again, I don't know, add even more clarity to it. Just play with the whites and things like that. So yeah, I'm just making it disappear at this moment. That doesn't look too great. So yeah, so I'm gonna get rid of that. So that is basically it. It probably is a little bit too fast, but at least I've taken the time to explain what each of them do. How long have I been going for? Right, okay, small heart attack then. I thought that last half an hour that I've just been filming, it definitely cut off, but I'm not sure where about to cut off, but I'm pretty sure I got to the end of, that I'd showed everything that I wanted to in this. Right, so if I go back to reset, that's how the image was out of camera. That's what we've done to the image. And that is my Astro preset. So I've added a lot more things in there, like with that radial filter and things like that, that the LUT doesn't do. But it's actually done a better job of the Milky Way there than I've done. Anyway, yeah. So again, just use the LUTs as a bit of a guide if you like, or if if there's someone that you really support and you want to buy their LUTs, then do, just to see what their settings are, what they use, and that's probably about as much as I'm going to say on that. I think I've shown it through. I hope that didn't cut out too early and that I've shown everything. But otherwise, this is really long, so I'm going to cut it here. Let me know what you think, and I really appreciate you watching, so I hope this is helpful. And yeah, thanks a lot, and I hope to see you again soon. Take care.